Hi folks, HR Funk here. And what I have with me today is an item that I've been wanting to test for a couple of years now, and finally, thanks to the folks at Optics Planet, I have one in for review. And that item in question is a loophole Delta Point micro red dot sight that you can see I have mounted here to my Smith & Wesson M&P 9. And in this video, we're going to be taking a close-up look at the Delta Point Micro here in the shop. I'll be telling you about some of its features and functions, and then we'll head off to the range and see how it performs when it's mounted to the M&P. So here we go with my review of the loophole Delta Point Micro. Now before I get into the review proper of the Delta Point Micro, I want to wind the clock back a little over 4 years when I purchased my first ever micro red dot sight for a handgun. And that's the one you see here, still installed on that very same handgun. This is my Smith & Wesson M&P Core 40. And I purchased this handgun at that time because I was still a working police officer, and I had gotten to the point where the sights on my handguns were starting to look a little bit fuzzy. I'm in my mid-50s now, and my visual acuity is not quite where it was when I was younger. And I want to bring that out to the forefront in this video because if I still had the vision that I had when I was in my 20s or in my 30s or even in my 40s, I would not be considering a micro red dot sight for handguns. In fact, in many respects, I think iron sights are still superior to handgun optics for many applications. But currently, in order to get sharp focus on my handgun sights, I have to use reading glasses. Now I can still shoot without reading glasses and get marginally okay accuracy, but when I put my reading glasses on, it sharpens up the sights and I can get the type of accuracy that I normally got when I was younger. When I decided to opt for a micro red dot sight on my duty handgun, it was because the only time I wear reading glasses are when I'm reading or when I'm shooting handguns on the range and I want to get that level of accuracy that I normally did. I don't wear them otherwise. So when I was out performing my duties as a police officer, or if I'm out off duty doing whatever I might be doing, I'm not wearing reading glasses. And should an occasion come around where I would have to defend myself, I'm probably not going to be able to call time out and put my reading glasses on and then say, okay, Mr. Bad Guy, now we can commence our gunfight. So for that reason, I started looking at micro red dot sights because micro red dots, much like other optics, put your eyes and the target on the same focal plane. So without reading glasses and with no visual correction whatsoever, I can come up with the micro red dot, I can see that sharp reticle, I can place it on my target, and I can start my trigger squeeze. Now there are some downsides to micro red dots. I'll get into those later on in the video. But for the most part, I was happy with the loophole Delta Point Pro that I mounted to this pistol, and it served me well for my last few years that I was working as a police officer. The biggest downside to the Delta Point Pro and other handguns of this sort comes about with regard to mounting them to the pistol that you're going to be using. For pistols like the M&P, or I should say the core version of the M&P, there are a variety of mounting plates or adapter plates that come with the handgun that accommodate different types of micro red dot sights, and you have to make sure you're using the right plate for the right sight and all of that. For other manufacturers, you have to either contact them after you purchase their optics ready handgun and order mounting plates for that handgun. Sometimes they supply them free, sometimes you have to pay for them, sometimes they're in stock, sometimes they're out of stock. The other option for handguns is to have the rear of the slide milled to accept a micro red dot sight, but when that's done, generally it is for one specific type of sight. And once that's mounted, trying to change to another type of sight is probably not going to be possible unless the other sight you're considering uses the same exact footprint as the one you mounted to begin with. So there are some issues associated with mounting a micro red dot sight to your handgun that have to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about doing that. With the Delta Point Micro that I'm going to start talking about in a moment, some of those issues no longer exist. With the Delta Point Micro, it is engineered to be installed on an unaltered Smith & Wesson M&P pistol or Glock pistol, and those are the only two handguns that this optic will accommodate currently. And it simply replaces the existing factory rear sight. And I'm going to have an installation video on my Rumble page. So if you go to Rumble, I go over everything associated with installing this rear sight on a Smith & Wesson M&P. The short version of it is you simply remove the existing factory rear sight, replace it with the dovetail mount that is part of the Delta Point Micro, and then you screw the sight itself into that dovetail mount to hold it in place. It's a relatively straightforward and simple process. As I said, I demonstrated in my Rumble video. Now, in the loopholed instructions that accompany the Delta Point Micro, it's very vague as far as the mounting procedure. Now, it's not difficult, but it basically says replace the rear sight with the dovetail mount and then install the sight. It also recommends that that mounting process be done by a gunsmith. As an armorer, I didn't have any problem at all installing that, but if you're not absolutely sure about what you're doing, you might want to have a gunsmith install this. There is one thing, and I'll mention this in this video, with the M&P, there is a spring and cap beneath the rear sight on the right-hand side of the slide, and when you remove the factory rear sight, you have to be certain that that spring and cap don't go shooting out into Never Never Land somewhere. So I did want to mention that in this video. But again, the nice thing about the Delta Point Micro is you don't have to have your sight milled, you don't need any special mounting brackets or plates or whatever, and in fact, if you change your mind later on, all you have to do is remove the Delta Point Micro, reinstall your factory rear sight, and your pistol is back in the original configuration that it was in when you purchased it. Now, let's take a close-up look at the Delta Point Micro. So I thought I would kick things off with a view through the Delta Point Micro. And what you're looking at now is the 3-minute of angle red dot reticle. It's located inside a 9mm lens. So this sight has a relatively small field of view, and it kind of gives you the same feel as looking through a ghost ring sight on some other firearms. You might notice that looking through the sight right now. And this sight has 8 illumination settings. I'll go over the process for changing the illumination shortly. And also, it's difficult to see in this view, but when we get a little bit different lighting, you'll be able to see there are 2 dots on either side of the body of the sight, so that if the sight quits functioning, you can either use those 2 sights to be able to use in conjunction with your front sight to be able to fire a shot, or you can use the body of the Delta Point Micro as a ghost ring, use your front sight the way you normally would in the lower 1/3 of the field of view, and you would be able to still use the handgun and fire aimed shots even though the sight itself wasn't working, and you don't have backup sights in the conventional sense. And here's a look at the Delta Point Micro in a little bit better light. In terms of dimensions, this sight is 2.25 inches in length. It is 0.9 inches wide at its widest point, which is right here at the battery compartment. It is 1.25 inches high, and I did a little bit more measuring on my own. From the top of the slide to the top of the sight housing is about 7/16 of an inch, which puts the center line of the reticle at about 7/32 of an inch. So not much higher, in fact, than conventional iron sights. And this will come into play later on when I'm talking about the offset of the sight over the bore. With conventional micro red dots, I see an offset deviation in my point of impacts when I'm firing shots closer to the target than where I've zeroed the sight. Those shots tend to hit low, so I have to compensate by aiming high. Because the Delta Point Micro is mounted relatively low, I don't have nearly as much mechanical offset for those closer shots. And again, I'll talk about that more later on. The Delta Point Micro is waterproof. It features Loophole's double diamond coating for scratch resistance. It's difficult to see the front lens here, but it is recessed back into the housing to protect it in case the front of the sight strikes something, or if you're using the sight for one-handed cycling of the slide. All of that is done to protect that front lens. At the rear of the sight, we can see the battery cover, and the Delta Point Micro is powered by one CR1632 battery. And in order to install that battery, you simply unscrew the lower half of the cover there and remove it, place the battery in, and then screw it back into place. This battery cover does need to be removed when you disassemble the handgun for cleaning or maintenance. So that is one issue with this sight to be aware of. It's not a big deal. You simply unscrew the battery cover, disassemble the pistol, clean it, and then when you put it back together, simply screw the battery cover back into place. Now, like most battery covers for optics, it is a little difficult to get it pushed up into place and screw it into position without cross-threading. What I found works best for that is to hold the cover tightly against the housing of the sight and turn it counterclockwise to begin with in order for the threads to mate, and then start to, again, while holding pressure against the sight body housing, turn it clockwise, and it will normally tighten pretty easily using that process. The battery cover doubles as the on-off switch. To turn the sight on, simply press and release that bottom of the battery cover and the sight will come on, and when it's turned on, it returns to its last illumination setting. So wherever you had the sight previously is where it is when you turn it back on. The cover also is used to cycle through the illumination settings. Each time you press and release the button, once the sight is turned on, it increases or decreases one setting in illumination. One nice thing about this sight, and this is something that was corrected over the older Delta Point sight that I had on my Smith & Wesson Core, and that is you can change directions for your illumination settings. If you're going brighter and brighter and all of a sudden you get to a point where it's too bright, if you press and hold the button for 2 seconds, then release it and start to press and release again, it will go the opposite direction. So that's nice. With the older Delta Point Pro, you had to cycle all the way to the brightest setting, and then it would cycle back to the lowest setting, and when you got to the lowest setting, it would then start to increase again back to the brightest setting. So it's nice with the newer Delta Point Micro that you can reverse directions with your illumination without cycling all the way through every one of the 8 settings. If you want to turn the Delta Point Micro off, you simply press and hold that illumination button or on-off button, whichever you want to call it, for 3 seconds, and that will turn it off. The sight also has Leupold's motion sensor technology, so if the sight is motionless for several minutes, it powers itself down and uses almost no battery power, which is very nice, and it's one of the things that also is shared with the older Delta Point Pro. And I have found the batteries last a long, long time in that sight. I'm expecting them to last a long time in the Delta Point Micro. If the sight powers itself down, anytime it senses motion, as in when you pick the handgun up, it powers the sight back up and you can use it as you normally would. Again, it goes back to the last illumination setting when it powers itself back on. I now have several Leupold optics that have that motion sensor technology, and I have never been in a situation where the sight took too long to power up for me to be able to use it for what I wanted to use it for. So it comes back on very, very quickly. If the battery gets low, and according to the Leupold instructions, if the illumination looks like it's one level lower than it should be, that's an indication that the battery needs to be replaced. Now, I'm not sure if I pick up the sight and look through it, I'm going to notice if it is one illumination level lower than it was the last time I used it. But to test that, you can turn the sight completely off. Again, press and hold that button for 3 seconds and release it. The sight will power down. Then press and release it so it powers back on. And if the battery is getting low, it will flash 10 times quickly. If you see it flashing 10 times when you power it back up, that means the battery needs to be replaced. And according to Leupold, even when you start to see that flashing of the battery, you still have several days worth of battery life. So it's not imminent that you do it right that second, but don't take a lot of time and get yourself a new battery in there. One last comment about the motion sensor technology is the fact that according to the instructions, the sight will not power itself down when it senses no movement if it is on illumination setting 1, 2, 3, or 4. Those are the lowest illumination settings, and according to the instructions, it does not power down because that maximizes battery life. The only thing I can surmise from that is it actually uses less energy from the battery to keep the sight continuously illuminated at those lower settings than it does to power itself back up when it's on those lower illumination settings. So again, that's my best guess on that, but that's straight from the owner's manual for the Delta Point Micro. On the left-hand side of the sight body, we can see the elevation and windage adjustment screws. And these screws are just friction fit screws. There are no clicks, detents, 1 MOA, hash marks, or anything else to help you when you zero the sight. And what I found when I got to the range is this really is kind of a trial and error process, because you really don't get a sense for how far you've turned the screw or how far that's going to be moving your point of impact. So you have to fire a shot or two, figure out where that is, and then decide if you need to turn the screw one direction or the other. Then fire another couple of shots to figure out if you need to go a little bit more that direction or a little bit farther back the direction you came from. And I wish the whole process was just a little bit more scientific than that. I wish we had some click adjustments that we could use to give us some reference when we're making those corrections, but there's not. We do have arrows on the sight body to show the direction that the point of impact is going to move when you turn the screw in that direction. Counterclockwise for windage moves the shot to the right, and counterclockwise for elevation moves the shot up. Obviously, going the opposite directions with those screws moves the shot the other direction. One complete 360-degree rotation or revolution of the elevation screw moves your point of impact 18 minutes of angle, according to the owner's manual. And one complete revolution of the windage screw moves your point of impact 36 minutes of angle. There are 100 minutes of angle total elevation for this sight, so that's 50 minutes of angle up and 50 minutes of angle down from mechanical center, and 180 minutes of angle windage adjustment, so 90 minutes of angle right or left from the center line of the sight. And the last thing I'll mention here in the shop is the Delta Point Micro is covered by Leupold's lifetime warranty. And I've had occasion to use that warranty, and they are very, very good about repairing or replacing their items if you have a problem with them. So now let's head out to the range and see how the Delta Point Micro performed. When I first got there, as you'll see, I started out with a 25-yard accuracy test, and I moved on from there. So let's head out to the range. And I've arrived out on the range with my M&P 9 2.0, outfitted now with the Leupold Delta Point Micro, and I'm going to do some shooting, and I'm going to start out from 25 yards, which is where I zeroed this sight yesterday when I was here. And I'm going to be using a different target today. This is another one from my target sponsor, Targets Online, and this is the Crouching Thug target. I thought it would be fun for today's video. And this is a target that's been around in law enforcement use forever. I can remember this back at least as far as the 1980s. And when I shoot from this distance of 25 yards, I am going to be aiming for dead center in the Crouching Thug's left fist. So let's see how this goes with the new Delta Point Micro sight. All right, let's go see where they hit. Well, folks, I can't complain about that. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shots, all on the Crouching Thug's left fist, right where I was aiming. So I don't think he's ever going to play the piano again, at least not with two hands. And those 5 shots are right at 2¼ inches center to center. So I'm very happy with that accuracy from both the pistol and this new Leupold sight from that distance of 25 yards. All right, after a little bit of masking tape, the Crouching Thug is as good as new, and I'm going to move on to some defensive drills with my M&P and the new Leupold sight. First up is going to be some controlled pairs from a distance of 5 yards. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 more out of 6 shots on the Crouching Thug's fist. One of them that I pulled just below, just clipped the bottom of his little finger here, and then one that I pulled down here. So this one was clearly my fault. As far as the sight goes, what I notice is when I come up, if I don't see that reticle right away, if I look for the front sight, the reticle will appear because it basically hovers right above the front sight. So that's helping me get a little bit quicker target acquisition with this red dot than I get with some others when I come up and I don't see the dot and I have to look around and take some time to figure out where it is before I can start my trigger press. It's much quicker with this system because I just know to look for my front sight. And on back we go to 7 yards for some failure drills. This is 2 shots to the body and 1 shot to the head in rapid succession. Let's see how the new sight and pistol combo do on this drill. Not good on that first drill. I had a hard time following the red dot. Let's see if I can close it up a little bit more on this second drill. That looked a little better. And I think that was the best one of all. So as far as the shot placement goes on the failure drill, it's actually not too bad. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 shots. Again, really well centered in the target, then 1 shot low and 1 shot high. My headshots, the first one, I believe it was the first one, hit the revolver right here, which is obviously inside of the head circle that we see at this part of the target. So I shot the gun out of his hand. Next 2 shots are right here. So placement is good. My time is a little off. You notice that time I was looking a little bit more for the red dot. When I came up, I believe it was for the second time through this drill. I just stopped and came back down because I wanted to try my presentation again and try to come up and catch that red dot more quickly. Second time through, that worked better. The third time was the best run of all. So it just goes to show that it does take some work and some training, even with this sight, to get a more natural presentation with this red dot style of sight. And I'm now back to a distance of 15 yards from the target. And from here, I'll try a 5-shot drill, starting at a low ready position and coming up and firing 5 shots center mass into the target at a medium shot tempo. So we'll see how it goes this time around. And not bad on that drill from 15 yards. I've got 1, 2, 3 shots nicely centered, 4 and 5 down here that I pulled a little low. I think this might be me just a little heavy on the trigger of my M&P and pulling those shots low myself. But overall, from 15 yards, I'm not too upset with that. I would have just been better off to raise my point of aim to about here as opposed to where I had it, which was in here. And now it's back once again to that distance of 25 yards, but this time around I'm not going to be shooting from the bench. I'll be shooting from a standing position and firing 3 shots into the body of the Crouching Thug. And from 25 yards, I've got 1, 2, and 3 shots on the target. And this one I pulled a little bit low. Again, I'm sure that's me. When we look at these 2 up here, those are very good hits. So accuracy with this Delta Point micro sight really is not a question. It is a very accurate sight. It is the speed that seems to be somewhat the limiting factor on this, and I'll talk about that more when we get back to the shop for the wrap-up. But first, it's now time to see if the Delta Point Micro on the M&P 2.09 is a 7-yard tack driver. Oh, I saw the dot dip just before the shot broke, folks. That was my fault. One more try. I'm getting kind of shaky today. I'm not sure why. Too much sun. Yes! On the third and final shot, the Delta Point Micro and the M&P 2.0 is a 7-yard tack driver. Okay folks, let's head back to the shop for some final thoughts on the Delta Point Micro. So some closing thoughts about the Delta Point Micro. First off, my belief when I first saw this sight, before I ever got this one to test, was that because of its extremely low mounting profile, it would be very easy for someone like myself who has spent a lifetime using iron sights to be able to come up and quickly acquire the red dot. And what I discovered on the range is kind of, sort of, yes, but still, just as you saw when I was working on the failure drill, there are times that I come up and I don't see it right away. And as I mentioned at the range, normally what I do is look for my front sight, and as soon as I find my front sight, I see the red dot. So if I come up and just now I don't see the red dot, but as soon as I bring my front sight over, I see that red dot sight. So I think the more that I work with this sight, the more it's going to become natural for me to properly align the red dot as I'm bringing the handgun to bear. But with that extremely small field of view, it just doesn't give me as much room. Now with the Delta Point Pro that I have on my M&P core pistol, I come up, this has a 7.5 minute of angle Delta reticle, and because of the very wide field of view, it seems to be pretty quick for me to pick that up. That was one of the things I really liked about that reticle. On my IWI Masada, I have my Hilux TD 3C sight, and this has a circle dot reticle. And by the way, there are reviews on all of these sights. If you search back through my channel, you'll be able to see pictures of the reticle and everything else. But this has a 32 minute of angle circle around, I believe, a 2 minute of angle dot. And with that very large circle, whenever I come up with the handgun, normally I can see some portion of that circle somewhere in my field of view in this sight. Then all I have to do is quickly bring it to where I need it on the target, and I can start my trigger press. With the Delta Point Micro, I don't get that. Again, I have to look for that front sight, and I have a very limited field of view to do that. So that's something to be aware of with this sight. I think the more that I work with this, the more I'm going to like it, but I just want everyone to be aware of that. Now, I talked about the low mounting and the mechanical offset of the point of impact, point of aim when I'm shooting at sights, or targets rather, closer than I have this sight zeroed for. And I really didn't notice it. In fact, I kind of forgot about that as I was shooting my way through the different drills out at the range. And it wasn't until I was working on the tack shot and I fired those first 2 low shots, and I just naturally corrected by aiming a little high, and I was aiming at about 11 o'clock just above the tack when I squeezed off the final shot. And it occurred to me when I was thinking about that later on, that's where I'm seeing the mechanical offset. It was just enough that from that distance of 7 yards, when I was aiming dead on at the tack, I was hitting about an inch low. Now, in most defensive scenarios, that's not going to be that big a deal, but if you're trying to make a very precise shot from those closer distances, like, oh, say, trying to drive a tack, you have to be aware there is still some mechanical offset. Now, it's not as great as I get with the more conventional red dot sights. With my Masada, if I'm firing a headshot in a failure drill from 7 yards, I basically am aiming for very high on the forehead to make sure that that shot is properly centered in the head when I'm making that shot. And I've gotten used to that, I think probably because I have to do the same thing when I'm using a red dot for AR-15s. And at closer distances, I just naturally start to aim a little bit high, and I do that pretty much naturally with these handguns now. Again, with the Delta Point Micro, it is so minor that I think in most circumstances you're not going to have to compensate like that. But again, like I said, I want everyone to be aware there is still some mechanical offset there. So in the end, there's a lot of things I like about the Delta Point Micro. I like the fact that it mounts very easily to an unaltered pistol. You don't need to worry about the mounting brackets or plates or whatever. You do have to be aware of the fact that these sights don't work with the M&P core. I'm not sure about the optics ready Glock or not. They might still work with those, but they do not work with the core pistol. It has to be an unaltered standard M&P. And you have to make sure you get the right model number Delta Point Micro for an M&P or for a Glock, depending on which handgun you need to accommodate. But I like the simple installation. I like the low profile. I like the fact that because of this sight and its low profile and its relatively compact dimensions, it fits a lot more standard holsters than some other conventional micro red dot sights. Many times you have to have a special holster for some of the larger sights like we have here. I like the fact that it mounts close to the top of the slide. I like the fact that it has a lifetime warranty. And as I said earlier, I think the more I work with the sight, the more I'm going to like it and the more I'm going to get used to the presentation. But it still is going to take some training. There's no free lunch here. You still have to work with your sight, work with your handgun, and make sure you're able to put accurate shots on target. It still has a small degree of mechanical offset. You can't really escape that. Now, to be perfectly fair, there is a small degree of that even with iron sights. If you are very close to the target and you're looking at your sights, the bullet itself is going to strike slightly below where the sights are. It just seems to be magnified when you're using a micro red dot. Also, with any kind of a red dot sight, any movement while you're squeezing the trigger is somewhat amplified by the sight, so it tends to move around a little bit as you are aiming in at the target. Obviously, the more steady you are, the less movement there is, but there's always some degree of that. I've noticed that with every red dot sight that I've ever used. The 3 minute of angle red dot in this particular sight seems to be a little bit more lively than the larger 7.5 minute of angle delta in the larger sight. So another thing to be aware of, and sometimes that can be distracting when you're shooting. Back in the plus column for the Delta Point Micro, I like the fact that I can use the sight and get good accuracy without having to resort to any sort of optical correction with reading glasses or anything else. For low light situations, I think it's fantastic. I don't have to worry about night sights. I've got that glowing sight to help me in a darker environment, so that's good. I like the fact that if the sight goes out, I can use the sight body as a ghost ring sight. And I don't think I ever did show the dots on the back of the sight. I'll try to bring this up here so you can see it now. And I'll see if I can get this illuminated, and it's probably not going to work right. There is a dot on either side of the sight right there. You could fill those in with white paint if you wanted to, so that it matched the white dot on the front sight. But that's another thing I like about this. You don't have to worry about special high-profile backup sights or anything else. You can just use your conventional front sight and the sight body if the sight goes out or is damaged and quits working or whatever. So that's another great thing. I think the sight demonstrates very, very good accuracy. That group from 25 yards, it was about 2.5 inches, I think. Very good accuracy from this handgun. I don't think I could have fired a group that accurately with the conventional iron sights. Back in the minus column is the fact that the sight has to have the battery cap removed in order to disassemble the pistol. That's minor, but it is something to be aware of. And last but not least, the windage and elevation adjustments, I would much prefer if they had some sort of click adjustments or something else to make that a little bit more precise, so it wasn't quite so much trial and error. In the end, I think it's a pretty good sight. They sell for about $300 depending upon where you find them. If you catch a sale, you can probably find them for less than that. Again, I'm going to keep working with this. There might be a chapter 2 out there someday in the future where I'll talk a little bit more about it and what I've decided after working with it over a greater period of time. But overall, I'm going to leave this mounted on my M&P 9, and we'll see what I think of it after some more time goes by. But that's going to do it for the video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off your purchase from Optics Planet. And thanks to Optics Planet for providing the Delta Point Micro for this review. As I said at the very beginning of the video, I've been wanting to review one of these for a long time, and they were finally able to get this to me, so thank you very much. Also remember the discount code from Hot Munitions. If you go to Hot Munitions, you can find my discount code there, which is HRFunk10, and that'll save you 10% off your purchase from Optics Planet. And last but not least is the new Target sponsor for the channel, Targets Online. Go to Targets Online, check out their website, and see if they have anything in their lineup that's going to meet your target needs. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.